The morning started like any other Tuesday in the Henderson household. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows as Sarah prepared breakfast for her daughter, 8-year-old Maya, who sat at the breakfast table swinging her legs and humming the theme song from her favorite cartoon. Maya was a spirited, energetic child with golden brown curls that bounced when she moved, a constellation of freckles across her nose, and a smile that could light up an entire room. She was the kind of kid who never stopped talking, who asked 1,000 questions about everything from why the sky was blue to how butterflies learned to fly. Her laughter was contagious, filling their home with pure joy. Sarah had noticed something peculiar over the past few weeks, though she tried to convince herself it was nothing serious. Maya had been drinking water constantly, going through an entire pitcher by afternoon. She would wake up in the middle of the night asking for more juice. Sarah had even caught her sneaking into the kitchen at 2 a.m., desperately searching the refrigerator for something to drink. When Sarah had gently suggested that perhaps she was drinking too much, Maya had looked genuinely confused. "But Mom, I'm so thirsty," she'd said, her voice small and worried. "It doesn't make sense." Then came the bathroom trips. Maya's teacher had called 3 days ago, politely mentioning that Maya was leaving class frequently to use the restroom. At first, Sarah thought it might be a urinary tract infection, something easily treatable with antibiotics. She'd made a mental note to schedule a pediatrician appointment, but life had been hectic. Between work deadlines, managing the household, and her husband David's demanding construction job, the appointment kept getting pushed to next week, then the week after that. That Tuesday morning, Sarah had kissed the top of Maya's head as she placed a bowl of cereal in front of her. "Eat up, sweetie. You have school in 30 minutes. Maya nodded but seemed distant, pushing the cereal around the bowl without actually eating much. She looked pale, almost greenish around the edges. Sarah noticed but attributed it to the early hour and Maya's natural reluctance to wake up before 7 in the morning. Most 8-year-olds weren't morning people, after all. By 10 p.m. that night, something felt terribly wrong. David had gone to bed around 9 o'clock, exhausted from a 12-hour day on the construction site. Sarah had stayed up watching television, folding laundry in the living room. Around 9:45, she'd walked upstairs to check on Maya, a habit she maintained every night before going to sleep herself. She pushed open the door to Maya's bedroom slowly, letting a slice of hallway light fall across the bed. What she saw made her blood run cold. Maya was drenched in sweat, not the light perspiration of a warm night, but sheets soaked completely through, as if someone had poured water over her. Her hair was plastered to her forehead, and her skin glistened with moisture. But more alarming than the sweat was Maya's unnatural stillness. She wasn't moving at all, not even the subtle rise and fall of normal sleep. She lay completely motionless, her breathing shallow and irregular. Sarah's maternal instinct screamed that something was devastatingly wrong. "Maya, honey," Sarah whispered urgently, leaning down to touch her daughter's shoulder. Maya didn't respond. Sarah's heart began pounding like a jackhammer in her chest. She reached down and felt Maya's forehead, burning hot, fever-hot, dangerously hot. "David, David!" Sarah screamed, her voice cracking with panic. She began gently shaking Maya's shoulder. "Wake up, baby, wake up." Maya's eyes fluttered open slowly, moving as if they were weighted down by lead. She stared at her mother without recognition for a terrifying moment. "Mom," she whispered hoarsely, confusion evident in every syllable. "I don't feel good." David burst through the doorway, still half asleep, pulling on a shirt. In seconds, Sarah explained what she'd found. They didn't hesitate. Within minutes, they had Maya wrapped in a blanket, buckled into the car, and were speeding toward Mary's hospital emergency room downtown. Maya drifted in and out of consciousness in the backseat as Sarah held her hand, whispering reassurances she didn't entirely believe herself. "It's going to be okay, sweetheart. We're going to get you help. Just stay with Mommy." The emergency room was a blur of fluorescent lights, urgent voices, and efficient medical personnel. Nurses immediately took Maya's temperature 1052 degrees Fahrenheit. Doctors asked rapid-fire questions while hooking her up to monitoring equipment that beeped and hummed ominously. A nurse drew blood while Maya whimpered in distress. The waiting felt eternal, though Sarah knew only minutes had passed. David sat frozen in a hard plastic chair, his arm around Sarah's shoulders. Then a doctor, a tall woman with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, entered the room and asked them to sit down. That phrase, "please sit down," has always been the precursor to life-changing news. The doctor's expression was sympathetic but grave. "Your daughter has type 1 diabetes," she said gently. "We believe she's been experiencing diabetic, a serious condition where her body produces too many ketones. If you hadn't brought her in when you did, this could have become life-threatening." The words seemed to come from underwater, distorted and dreamlike. Diabetes. Sarah had associated diabetes with older people, with obesity, with lifestyle choices. She'd never heard of a child having it. The doctor continued, explaining that type 1 diabetes was an autoimmune disease where the pancreas simply stopped producing insulin, the hormone necessary to regulate blood sugar. It had nothing to do with diet or lifestyle. It was genetic, unpredictable, and permanent. There was no cure. "She'll need insulin injections multiple times daily for the rest of her life," the doctor explained, showing them charts and diagrams. "She'll need to monitor her blood sugar constantly. You'll need to count carbohydrates, manage her diet carefully, and be vigilant about preventing hypoglycemic episodes, dangerously low blood sugar, which can cause seizures or loss of consciousness." Sarah felt the room spinning. She looked at Maya, who lay in the hospital bed looking smaller than she'd ever looked before, tubes attached to her arms, a heart monitor beeping steadily on the wall beside her. Her daughter's childhood had just fundamentally changed. The carefree life of birthday parties and playground adventures suddenly seemed impossibly distant, replaced by a future of medical appointments, finger pricks, insulin pens, and constant vigilance. Over the next 3 days in the hospital, the family attended diabetes education classes. They learned how to inject insulin, how to recognize warning signs of dangerously low blood sugar, how to use a glucose meter, and how to navigate the complex mathematics of carbohydrate counting. Sarah wrote everything down in a notebook, though the information felt overwhelming and foreign. When they finally brought Maya home, Sarah held her hand tightly. David drove slowly, as if careful driving could somehow protect their daughter from her own body. The weeks that followed were the darkest of Sarah's life. Maya stopped playing tag at recess, afraid of physical exertion that might lower her blood sugar unexpectedly. She became anxious, of every sensation in her body, constantly asking if she felt a crash coming on. The cheerful, talkative child Sarah knew began withdrawing, asking fewer questions, smiling less. Other children didn't understand why Maya had to sit out sometimes or check her blood before eating snacks. Some kids made insensitive comments. Teachers forgot to check her blood sugar at appropriate times. Friends' parents forgot she couldn't have sugary treats. Sarah felt crushed under the weight of it all. She'd read countless articles about type 1 diabetes, joined online support groups, and attended parent meetings. Everyone spoke of learning to manage and adapt, but none of it felt manageable. Every single day was a battle. Every moment carried risk. The thought that her daughter would face this challenge for the rest of her life, potentially 50, 60, 70 years of injections, monitoring, and complications, was almost unbearable. It was during one particularly dark moment at a diabetes support group meeting that Sarah heard about something that would change everything forever. The fluorescent lights in the church basement cast a pale glow over the dozen or so parents sitting in a circle of folding chairs. It was Thursday evening, and Sarah had forced herself to attend yet another type 1 diabetes support group meeting, though she'd seriously considered canceling. She was exhausted from the emotional toll of managing Maya's condition, and frankly, hearing other parents discuss their struggles sometimes made her feel worse rather than better. Everyone seemed to have their lives together, or at least they pretended to. Sarah felt like she was drowning. A woman named, whose teenage son had been diabetic for 12 years, was speaking about how she'd learned to manage the constant worry. "You have to find ways to give yourself peace of mind," was saying, wrapping her hands around a paper cup of lukewarm coffee. "Otherwise, you'll burn out completely, and then you won't be able to help your child." Sarah nodded mechanically, having heard similar advice countless times. She was about to check her phone for the time, wondering if she could leave early without seeming rude, when another woman in the circle, whose name Sarah believed was, leaned forward with sudden intensity. "Have any of you heard about medical alert dogs?" asked, her voice cutting through the ambient chatter. The room fell silent. A few parents exchanged confused glances. One father actually laughed. "Like a service dog?" he asked skeptically. "What could a dog possibly do?" "More than you'd think," said, pulling out her phone. "My nephew has type 1 diabetes. He's 9 years old, same as Maya." She glanced at Sarah. "Last year, my sister did something that seemed absolutely crazy at the time. She got him trained medical alert dog. The dog is specifically trained to detect when my nephew's blood sugar is dangerously low before he even feels it happening." Sarah's attention suddenly focused completely on. This was the first genuinely novel idea she'd heard in months. "Detect it how?" Sarah heard herself asking. "Through scent," explained, scrolling through photos on her phone. "Dogs have an incredible sense of smell, way more powerful than humans. Apparently, when blood sugar drops to dangerous levels, the body releases specific biochemical markers through sweat and breath. A trained dog can smell this and alert the person before they lose consciousness or have a seizure." "That sounds like science fiction," another parent said dismissively. "I thought so too," admitted. "But let me show you this video." She turned her phone around and everyone leaned in. On the small screen, they watched a golden retriever sitting calmly next to a teenage boy who was doing homework. Suddenly, the dog stood up and pawed at the boy's leg repeatedly, refusing to stop. The boy checked his blood sugar. It read 68 dl and dropping rapidly. The dog had alerted before the boy felt any symptoms. Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, a flutter of something she hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. "How much does something like that cost?" she asked quietly. His expression grew somber. "That's the catch. Around $15,000 for 6 months of specialized training, and that's just the dog. There's no guarantee your insurance will cover it." A low whistle escaped from one of the fathers. Several parents immediately shook their heads, dismissing the idea as financially impossible. Sarah sat back in her folding chair, the flutter of hope deflating slightly. $15,000. That was more money than they had sitting in their savings account. That was more than their monthly mortgage payment. That was impossible. But as the meeting continued and other topics were discussed, Sarah's mind kept drifting back to that video. She kept picturing Maya, no longer terrified about unexpected crashes, able to play freely knowing that Scout, some hypothetical dog, would alert her to danger. She kept imagining the peace that might come from having that extra layer of protection. That night after Maya had gone to bed, Sarah sat at the kitchen table with her laptop and began researching. She started with the video had mentioned, then fell down a rabbit hole of articles, testimonials, and scientific research about canine scent detection. The more she read, the more she became convinced this wasn't pseudoscience or wishful thinking. It was real. She found peer-reviewed studies showing that trained dogs could detect hypoglycemic episodes with over 90% accuracy. She watched testimonial after testimonial from families whose lives had been transformed. A mother in Boston described how her daughter had gained confidence and independence. A father in Texas talked about being able to sleep at night without constant fear. A teenager in California described the relief of having an early warning system that her own body couldn't provide. At 2 a.m., Sarah discovered the organization that had trained the dog in this video, the Colorado Center for Medical Alert Dogs. Their website was beautifully designed and professionally presented. They had a waiting list of over 200 families. The cost was exactly what had mentioned, $15,000 for a 6-month training program, with no guarantee of success. Some dogs simply didn't have the temperament or ability for the work. Of those accepted into the program, about 85% successfully completed training. The other 15% were returned to their families as regular pets, and the families received a partial refund. Sarah clicked through to their application process. There were detailed questionnaires, background checks, medical information requirements. They wanted to ensure that the families were appropriate candidates, that they understood the commitment, that the dogs would be going to homes where they would be cherished and properly cared for. She downloaded the application form at 3 a.m., her hands trembling slightly as she read through it. This could work. This could actually work. The next morning after David left for work, Sarah called his construction company's office. "I need to talk to my husband. It's urgent," she told his supervisor, fighting to keep her voice steady. 20 minutes later, David called back from the job site, concern evident in his voice. "Is everything okay? Is Maya okay?" "Everyone's fine," Sarah quickly assured him. "But I need to tell you about something I discovered last night. I need to show you something." That evening, Sarah sat David down at the dinner table, after Maya was in bed, and walked him through everything she'd discovered. She showed him the videos, the research, the testimonials. She explained how the dog would be trained to detect dangerous blood sugar drops before Maya even felt them. She talked about how this could give Maya her childhood back, how it could ease the constant anxiety they both carried. David listened patiently, but when Sarah finished, he was quiet for a long moment. $15,000, he finally said, his voice careful. "Sarah, we don't have that kind of money." "I know," Sarah said, her heart sinking. "But what if we did? What if we found a way?" David rubbed his face, a gesture she recognized as him shifting into problem-solving mode. "We could take out a loan," he said slowly. "We could dip into the retirement account, though there would be penalties and taxes. We could, I don't know, sell something." "Your truck," Sarah suggested quietly. "I need the truck for work," David said. Then, after a pause, "But maybe I could use the company truck instead. Let me talk to my boss." Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah and David made a series of decisions that would have seemed absolutely insane just months earlier. David's boss agreed to let him use a company truck during work hours. They emptied their emergency savings account, the money they'd been building for a decade, the security blanket that gave them peace of mind. They took out a $10,000 personal loan, the maximum they could qualify for. They cashed out $4,000 from David's IRA, accepting the taxes and penalties that came with early withdrawal. Sarah sold her grandmother's jewelry, pieces she'd thought she'd pass down to Maya someday, for another $1,500. It was terrifying, it was reckless. Their friends and family thought they'd lost their minds. "You're spending how much on a dog?" her mother had asked incredulously. "Sarah, that's insane. That money should go to Maya's medical care, her education." "It is for her medical care," Sarah had replied firmly. "This is her medical care." But underneath the fear was something else, determination and hope. 3 weeks after submitting the application, the Colorado Center for Medical Alert Dogs called. They had accepted Maya into their program. They would begin training a dog specifically for her needs. Within 6 months, if all went well, they would have Scout. Sarah hung up the phone and cried, not tears of despair, but tears of possibility. The 6 months of waiting felt like 6 years. Sarah found herself constantly checking her email, refreshing the Colorado Center's website, and rereading the progress updates they sent every 2 weeks. The first update arrived in late January. They had identified a suitable puppy, a golden retriever with excellent genetics, the right temperament, and the physical attributes needed for medical alert work. The center had begun his initial socialization and basic obedience training. Sarah printed out the photo and put it on the refrigerator. The puppy, unnamed at that point, was absolutely adorable, with soft amber-colored fur and intelligent eyes that seemed to look directly into the camera. Maya became obsessed with the idea of the dog. She created a scrapbook of golden retrievers, researched their breed characteristics, and spent hours imagining what her life would be like once the dog arrived. "Do you think he'll sleep in my room?" she asked one evening, curled up against her mother on the couch. "Will he like peanut butter? Can I teach him tricks?" Sarah gently explained that the dog would have special training that regular dog owners wouldn't understand, that his primary job was to keep her safe, and that while he would certainly be part of the family, their relationship would be unique and important in ways that were different from regular pets. "That makes him even more special," Maya had said simply, and Sarah's heart had swelled with love for her thoughtful daughter. By April, the updates from Colorado became more frequent and detailed. The puppy, identified now as Scout by his trainers, was progressing exceptionally well. He had completed his foundational obedience training and was beginning his specialized scent detection work. The trainers described him as highly motivated, intelligent, and displaying the exact personality profile we look for in medical alert dogs. Sarah shared every update with David, and they both tried not to get too excited, cognizant of the 15% failure rate. What if Scout didn't complete his training? What if something went wrong? In May, Sarah received a phone call from Dr. Mitchell, the director of the Colorado Center for Medical Alert Dogs. "I wanted to give you a personal update," Dr. Mitchell said warmly. "Scout is exceptional. We're very confident he's going to be an excellent match for Maya. His scent detection abilities are off the charts, better than 95% of the dogs we've trained. His temperament is perfect. He's bonded well with his trainers and is thriving in the program." Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. "Really?" "Really," Dr. Mitchell confirmed. "We're scheduling his final certification training for late June. I'd like you to fly out to Colorado in the first week of July so we can do a formal transfer and certification process. You and David and Maya will come out, spend 3 days with us, meet Scout, learn how to work with him, and go through extensive training on his alert protocols and care requirements." By June, the excitement in the Henderson household was palpable. Maya could barely concentrate at school. She had started a countdown calendar in her room, crossing off each day. David began researching flights and hotels in Denver. Sarah created detailed checklists of everything they needed to prepare, reading materials about working with service dogs, medical alert protocols, emergency response procedures. Then, on July 3rd, the Henderson family found themselves standing in the parking lot of the Colorado Center for Medical Alert Dogs on the outskirts of Denver. The facility was a large, modern building set on several acres of beautiful grounds with manicured lawns, obstacle courses, and open spaces for training. Sarah felt her stomach flutter with nervous anticipation. After 6 months of waiting, of hopping, of believing in this possibility, they were finally here. Dr. Mitchell, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and the warmest smile Sarah had ever seen, greeted them at the entrance. She shook their hands firmly and immediately knelt down to Maya's level. "You must be Maya. I'm Dr. Mitchell, and I have someone very special I want you to meet. Are you ready?" Maya nodded, her eyes wide with nervous excitement. Dr. Mitchell led them through the facility to a large, comfortable room with soft furniture, windows overlooking the grounds, and an area set up specifically for introductions. "Scout is in the back," Dr. Mitchell explained. "He's been prepared for this moment. We want his first meeting with you to be calm and positive. Let's all sit down and I'll bring him in." Sarah, David, and Maya settled onto a comfortable sectional sofa. Sarah's heart was pounding. She reached over and squeezed Maya's hand. David put his arm around both of them. The door opened and Scout walked in. He was larger than Sarah had expected, probably 70 pounds of solid, muscular golden retriever. His fur was a beautiful amber color, lustrous and well-groomed. His gait was confident and purposeful, but what struck Sarah most was his eyes, intelligent, focused, aware. This wasn't just a dog, this was an animal with purpose, with training, with intelligence shining through. Scout approached slowly, his tail wagging gently. He looked directly at Maya and something seemed to pass between them, a recognition, a connection. Slowly, he walked over and gently rested his head on Maya's lap. Maya's breath caught. "Hi, Scout," she whispered, reaching out to touch his soft fur. Her hand moved across his head and Scout leaned into the contact, his tail wagging more enthusiastically now. "This is beautiful," Dr. Mitchell said softly. Often, medical alert dogs seem to understand their purpose instinctively. Scout has been trained to recognize Maya's scent. We've been working with blood samples and scent markers throughout his training. I suspect he already knows you're his person. Over the next 3 days, the Hendersons underwent intensive training. Dr. Mitchell and her team taught them how to recognize Scout's alerts, how to respond appropriately, and how to maintain his training and well-being. They learned that Scout would live with them full-time, sleeping in the house, accompanying Maya to school and activities. They learned about his dietary needs, his exercise requirements, and how to recognize signs of stress or illness. On the final day, Dr. Mitchell introduced them to Scout's most important training element, the secret command. Scout responds to standard obedience commands, Dr. Mitchell explained, but his alert system operates on a different protocol. When Scout detects a dangerous drop in Maya's blood sugar, he will execute his trained alert sequence. However, Maya needs to be able to confirm the alert and tell Scout to escalate if needed. This is where the secret command comes in. She demonstrated a specific hand gesture, a particular way of holding the hand and moving it, and then spoke a phrase that only she would repeat to them. This is the confirmation command. When Scout alerts, Maya will make this gesture and say this phrase. Scout will then intensify his alert, refuse to move, and place his paw on her leg, essentially saying this is serious, get help now. This command should only be used when Scout alerts. It's powerful, and it tells Scout that Maya acknowledges the alert and is taking action. Sarah watched carefully, mentally recording every detail. David wrote it down. Maya practiced the gesture repeatedly until it became second nature. "This command is special," Dr. Mitchell said seriously. "It's a secret between you, Maya, and Scout. It's your private communication system. Nobody else needs to understand it or know about it. To everyone else, it will just look like Maya is talking to her dog, but you'll know what it means. You'll know what it represents." On their final evening, as they packed their suitcases in their hotel room, Scout lay on the floor beside Maya's bed, his head resting on his paws. Maya sat down next to him, running her fingers through his fur. "Scout," she whispered, "you're going to help me, aren't you?" Scout lifted his head and gently nudged her hand with his nose. "We're going to be a team," Maya continued. "You and me, a real team." The next morning, the Henderson family, now a family of 5, drove home to their suburban neighborhood. Scout rode in the back of David's truck, his head sticking out the window, tongue flapping in the wind, looking for all the world like just another family dog. But beneath that golden fur and those intelligent eyes was something extraordinary. Scout carried with him the power to change everything. The first hint of what was to come arrived that very Saturday afternoon when Sarah took Scout and Maya to the local park. It was a beautiful day, sunny, mild, with just enough breeze to make the trees whisper. The playground was crowded with children and parents enjoying the weekend. Sarah had wanted to socialize Scout in public, to help him acclimate to crowds and distractions while remaining focused on Maya. It seemed like a perfect opportunity. They were barely through the park gates when Sarah noticed the looks. Other parents began pointing, their eyes tracking Scout as he walked calmly beside Maya on his specially fitted harness and leash. Conversations seemed to pause mid-sentence. Within minutes, a cluster of mothers had gathered nearby, their body language suggesting curiosity tinged with skepticism. "That's a big dog," one woman named observed, her tone neutral but her eyes assessing. "Is he dangerous?" "No, not at all," Sarah replied warmly. "He's a medical alert dog. He's trained to help my daughter manage her diabetes." The comment was met with a moment of silence and then laughed, a genuine, amused laugh. A dog that can do medical work, that's quite a claim. Another mother who introduced herself as Jennifer leaned closer, like one of those service dogs for blind people, but for diabetes. She said it in a tone that suggested the idea was vaguely absurd. I didn't know that was a thing. It absolutely is, Sarah said, feeling her patience already wearing thin. She launched into an explanation about canine scent detection, the training Scout had received, the science behind how dogs could detect biochemical changes in the body. The mothers listened politely, but Sarah could see the skepticism written across their faces like neon signs. They exchanged meaningful glances, the kind that said, "Poor woman," clearly desperate and gullible. That must have been very expensive, said, and there was something in her tone that suggested she was questioning the family's financial priorities. Yes, it was, Sarah responded, keeping her voice level, but it was worth every penny. Over the following weeks, similar scenarios played out repeatedly. At the grocery store, a cashier had commented loudly, "Is that dog a real service dog or just a pet? Because I thought service dogs had special vests." Scout wasn't wearing a vest, just his harness, because Dr. Mitchell had explained that standard medical alert dogs didn't require the formal vests that some public service dogs wore. But Sarah was tired of having to defend these decisions to strangers. At a restaurant where they had outdoor seating, a server had actually asked to see certification papers, implying doubt that Scout was legitimately trained. When Sarah explained he was a private medical alert dog and didn't have the same legal requirements as public service dogs, the server's expression suggested she didn't believe that was a real thing. The most painful skepticism, however, came from people who should have known better. Sarah's own mother, when she visited one weekend in August, actually took Sarah aside in the kitchen while Maya was in the living room. "Sweetheart, I need to talk to you about something," her mother began carefully, in that tone parents use when they're about to deliver difficult truths. "Are you sure you're not being taken advantage of? $15,000 for a dog. That seems like an awful lot of money, and I'm not sure this is actually legitimate. Have you researched whether this organization is even credible?" "Mom, I've done extensive research," Sarah replied, fighting to keep her voice calm. "This is a legitimate facility. They have published research, they work with medical professionals, and Scout is already making a difference." "Has he, though?" her mother pressed. "Or does it just feel like he has because you want it so badly, because you need it to be true?" The question stung because it touched on Sarah's deepest fear, that she had made an enormous financial mistake, that she had somehow fooled herself into believing in something that wasn't real. Teachers at Maya's school proved equally skeptical. During a parent-teacher conference in September, Maya's third-grade teacher, Mrs. Henderson, no relation, had commented, "Maya mentions Scout constantly. I'm a little concerned she might be becoming overly dependent on the dog emotionally, especially if the dog isn't actually providing medical benefits. Has her diabetes management actually improved?" "Scout has been with us for only 2 months," Sarah had replied tersely. "And yes, Maya's anxiety levels have improved significantly. She's more willing to participate in physical activities." "Well, that could be a placebo effect," Mrs. Henderson suggested. "Kids are suggestible. She might just feel braver because she has a dog, regardless of whether the dog is actually capable of doing what you claim." Sarah had left that conference feeling furious and deflated simultaneously. The most public expression of doubt came from the local news station. Sarah had actually reached out to them, hoping to do a human interest story about Scout and medical alert dogs, something that might inspire other families and raise awareness about type 1 diabetes. When the assignment editor, a man named Tom, agreed to send a reporter, Sarah had been hopeful. Maybe public recognition would help validate Scout's role and shut down some of the skepticism. The reporter who showed up was professional but clearly unconvinced. During the interview, he asked pointed questions. How do you know the dog is actually detecting her blood sugar? Couldn't it just be coincidence if the dog happens to alert around the same time her blood sugar drops? What's the scientific basis for believing a dog can smell biochemical changes? Isn't this more likely to be wishful thinking on your family's part? When the story aired 3 days later, it was presented in a way that made the whole thing sound dubious at best, fraudulent at worst. The title was "Family Invests Thousands in Unproven Diabetes Treatment. Medical Professionals Weigh In." While the story wasn't overtly hostile, the framing suggested Sarah and David were desperate parents who had been hoodwinked by a company exploiting their vulnerability. Comments on the local news website were brutal. "This is crazy. That family wasted their money. Dogs can't do that. This is ridiculous. Poor kid. Her parents are delusional." Sarah had made the mistake of reading the comments at 2 a.m., lying awake in bed, and had spent the rest of the night feeling sick. Maya, meanwhile, was beginning to notice the skepticism and doubt. She overheard conversations at school where kids questioned whether Scout was real. One girl had actually asked Maya, "So why does your dog have to be so special? Why can't a normal dog do what yours does?" The implication was clear. Either Maya was lying, or she was stupid enough to believe in something impossible. By late September, Maya's confidence began to waver. She started asking questions. "Mom, can Scout really actually help me? Or are people right that he's just a regular dog?" The pain in her daughter's voice broke Sarah's heart. They had worked so hard to get Scout, they had sacrificed so much, and now doubt was creeping in. David tried to reassure Maya. "Scout has been specially trained by experts. He knows things regular dogs don't know. People who haven't seen him in action don't understand. That's okay." But the weight of community skepticism was taking a toll on everyone. Sarah found herself becoming defensive, exhausted by constantly having to defend her family's choices. She questioned her own judgment. Had they made a terrible mistake? Was she fooling herself into believing Scout was something he wasn't? What if he failed? What if all this sacrifice and hope amounted to nothing? One evening in early October, Sarah sat in the dark living room after everyone had gone to bed. Scout lay at her feet, his presence somehow comforting. She reached down and stroked his soft fur. "Please," she whispered into the darkness, "please prove them all wrong. Please show them what you can do." Scout lifted his head, rested his chin on her knee, and sighed softly, as if he was ready for his moment to come. That moment was only weeks away. October 15th arrived with clear skies and perfect autumn weather, the kind of day that seemed designed for a school field trip. Mrs. third-grade class from Riverside Elementary was scheduled to visit the downtown Science Museum, an exciting day packed with interactive exhibits, planetarium shows, and hands-on learning experiences. Maya had been looking forward to it for weeks, and Sarah had given careful consideration to whether Scout should accompany her. After consulting with Dr. Mitchell, they had decided it was important for Scout to experience public environments and crowds. The Science Museum would be an excellent real-world test of his training. Sarah had packed Scout's care supplies in a special backpack: water, treats for reward training, and a small blanket. She'd written detailed instructions for Mrs. about Scout's needs and emergency protocols. She'd also, somewhat nervously, mentioned to the teacher that Scout was a medical alert dog trained to detect Maya's blood sugar fluctuations. Mrs. had nodded politely, but Sarah had caught that familiar glimmer of doubt in her eyes. "Just treat him like a regular dog," Sarah had added, trying to sound casual despite the anxiety coiling in her stomach. "But if Scout alerts, if he gets really focused on Maya and starts pawing at her, please tell me immediately." "Of course," Mrs. had assured her, though her tone suggested she didn't expect Scout would actually alert to anything. The morning of the field trip, Maya woke excited and nervous. She ate a careful breakfast, oatmeal with berries and toast, which Sarah measured and counted for carbohydrates. Maya took her insulin injection without complaint, a routine she'd become accustomed to over the past months. Scout was equally excited, sensing the unusual activity and preparation. "You're going to be amazing today," Sarah whispered to Scout as she adjusted his harness one final time. "You're going to show everyone what you can do." At the museum, the class was divided into groups. Mrs. kept Maya, Scout, and 3 other students close together as they moved through the exhibits. Scout walked calmly at Maya's side, his focus primarily on her despite all the visual and auditory stimulation around them. Other children were fascinated by him, asking questions, wanting to pet him. Scout tolerated the attention politely but never strayed from his position near Maya. By mid-morning, they had visited 3 major exhibits and were heading toward the Planetarium Theater for a show about constellations. The group filed into the darkened theater, and the children settled into their seats. Maya sat between her friend Jessica and Scout, who lay on the floor beside her as the lights dimmed completely. Then, something that should have been routine began to go catastrophically wrong. What neither Sarah nor the school nurses knew was that Maya had experienced a growth spurt over the past 2 weeks. Her insulin sensitivity had shifted, something that happened unpredictably with growing children. Additionally, she had been more active than usual, running around the museum exhibits with excitement. The combination of increased insulin sensitivity, unusual physical activity, and the carbohydrates she'd consumed at breakfast created a perfect storm of metabolic conditions. Her blood sugar began dropping, and it was dropping fast. 15 minutes into the planetarium show, as the narrator explained the movement of constellations across the night sky, Maya felt a strange sensation wash over her. Not the gradual, recognizable onset of low blood sugar that she was learning to identify. This was different, sudden and disorienting. The stars on the screen seemed to blur and swim. Her hands felt tingly. Her mouth had gone dry. A wave of confusion rolled through her mind like fog rolling in from the ocean. She tried to focus on what the narrator was saying, but the words sounded distorted, as if coming from underwater. The theater around her seemed to tilt slightly. She blinked hard, trying to clear her vision, but the dizziness intensified. That's when Scout suddenly changed. The dog had been lying peacefully at Maya's feet. Suddenly, he stood up, his entire body rigid with purpose. His ears perked forward. His nostrils flared. He had caught the scent he'd been trained to recognize, the specific biochemical markers of Maya's blood sugar plummeting into dangerous territory. Scout pressed against Maya's leg urgently, a low whine escaping his throat. It was subtle enough not to create a complete disturbance in the darkened theater, but it was unmistakable to anyone paying attention. He whined again, more insistent this time. Maya, even through the fog of her confusion, recognized something was wrong. Scout never acted this way. She tried to process what was happening, but her brain felt sluggish, like she was thinking through molasses. Scout placed his paws on Maya's lap, his eyes intense and focused directly on hers. He whined again, urgent, demanding attention. This was his alert. This was what he'd been trained to do. Maya's mind, even in its confused state, reached for the protocol she'd been taught, the secret command. Scout was telling her something was seriously wrong. She needed to respond. With trembling hands, Maya made the gesture Dr. Mitchell had taught her. Her fingers moved into the specific configuration, her hand held at the precise angle. Then, her voice shaky and barely a whisper in the darkness, she spoke the phrase, "Scout, alert." What happened next was like watching a switch flip. Scout immediately removed his paws from her lap and sat down firmly on the floor. He refused to move. He placed his paw directly on Maya's leg and stared at her with an intensity that was almost overwhelming. Every muscle in his body screamed urgency. Every line of his posture communicated, "This is serious. This is real. Get help now." At that exact moment, Jessica, sitting on Maya's other side, noticed her friend looked pale and strange. "Maya, are you okay?" she whispered. But Maya couldn't respond. Her lips felt numb. Her vision was starting to tunnel. That's when Mrs., who had been sitting several rows back, noticed the disturbance. She saw Scout's unusual behavior, saw him sitting rigidly at Maya's side, saw him placing his paw on the girl's leg with unmistakable urgency. She saw Maya's pale face in the dim light of the planetarium screen. Years later, Mrs. would admit that she didn't understand what was happening, but Scout's behavior was so obviously intentional, so clearly communicating something important, that she couldn't ignore it. She made her way over to Maya's seat and knelt down. "Maya, honey, what's wrong?" she asked quietly. Maya could barely form words. "Scout, alert," she managed to whisper. Mrs.'s eyes widened as the significance of the moment crashed over her. This wasn't a dog misbehaving. This wasn't a false alarm. This was a trained medical alert dog doing exactly what he was supposed to do. "We need to get you to the museum nurse station," Mrs. said urgently, already standing up. "Come on." But Scout wouldn't move. He refused to budge from his position, his paw still on Maya's leg. His training had taught him that he shouldn't let Maya move until he was certain help was on the way. "Scout, it's okay. We're getting help," Mrs. assured him, and something in her calm authority seemed to register with the dog. Scout stood and walked directly beside Maya as they left the theater, his body language still screaming urgency. They made it to the museum's first aid station in less than 3 minutes. The nurse, a woman named, immediately recognized something was seriously wrong. Before she could ask questions, Mrs. said, "This is Maya. Her dog alerted her to low blood sugar. She needs to check her glucose immediately." Didn't hesitate. She knew from the school's records that Maya was diabetic. She retrieved a glucose meter from the first aid kit and quickly pricked Maya's finger. The number that appeared on the screen made everyone in the room catch their breath. 42 DL. Critically low, dangerously low. "How are you feeling, honey?" asked, already reaching for juice boxes and glucose tablets. Confused, Maya whispered, "Everything's fuzzy." "Your blood sugar is very low," explained, opening a juice box and putting the straw to Maya's lips. "Your dog is a very good boy for alerting you. Another 5 minutes without treatment and this could have become very serious." As the glucose began to raise Maya's blood sugar levels, as her mind began to clear and her vision to sharpen, one thing became absolutely clear. Scout had just saved her life. Scout, the dog that skeptics had dismissed as a waste of money. Scout, whose abilities people had questioned and mocked. Scout, with his secret command that only Maya understood. Scout had proven every doubter wrong. By the time Sarah picked Maya up from school that afternoon, the story had already spread through the entire 3rd grade like wildfire. Within hours, it had traveled through the entire elementary school. By evening, it had reached the district office. The narrative was simple but extraordinary. A trained dog had detected a life-threatening medical emergency that humans had missed, executing a precise alert sequence that had likely saved a child's life. The first indication that something significant had shifted came when Sarah's phone began ringing at 4 p.m., while she was still in the car with Maya and Scout. The caller ID showed Mrs. number. Sarah's heart jumped, worried something had gone wrong at the museum. "Sarah, I wanted to call you directly," Mrs. began, her voice filled with emotion. "I owe you an apology. I didn't fully understand what Scout could do, and I was skeptical about having him at the museum today. But what I witnessed was extraordinary. That dog saved Maya's life today. If Scout hadn't alerted, if you hadn't trained Maya to respond to his alert, I don't know what would have happened. I'm truly sorry for ever doubting you." Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. "Thank you for saying that, Mrs. Thank you for listening to Scout and getting Maya to the nurse station so quickly." "I'll be speaking to the principal today about this," Mrs. continued. "I think the school community needs to know about what happened, and I think they need to understand what Scout is capable of." By the next morning, an email had been sent to all parents in the Riverside Elementary community from Principal Martinez. The email detailed the incident at the Science Museum, carefully, professionally, but with clear acknowledgement of Scout's heroic intervention. This incident demonstrates the remarkable capabilities of specialized service animals, the email read. We are grateful for Scout's training and for the Henderson family's commitment to educating our school community about medical alert dogs. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Parents who had previously been dismissive began calling Sarah, asking questions. Where had they gotten Scout? How much did it cost? Could their own children benefit from a medical alert dog? One mother whose son had been recently diagnosed with type 1 diabetes called in tears. I saw the email about what Scout did, she said. I want that for my son. I want him to have that protection and that peace of mind. Can you give me the contact information for the organization? Teachers who had previously exchanged skeptical glances now asked to learn more about diabetes and service animals. The school librarian ordered books on the subject. The physical education teacher made a point of approaching Maya in the hallway to tell her how proud she was of Scout. But the real turning point came 48 hours after the incident, when a local news reporter named David, no relation to Mrs., received a tip about the story. Unlike the previous reporter who had presented the story skeptically, David approached it with genuine curiosity and respect for the science. He did his research. He contacted the Colorado Center for Medical Alert Dogs and spoke directly with Dr. Mitchell about the capabilities and training of medical alert dogs. He reviewed peer-reviewed studies on canine scent detection. When the story aired on the evening news on October 17th, it was titled, "Local Girl's Medical Alert Dog Saves Her Life, a Remarkable Partnership." The segment opened with footage of Scout walking beside Maya, looking every bit the hero he had proven to be. David's voiceover was respectful and informed. 8-year-old Maya Henderson lives with type 1 diabetes, a condition that can be life-threatening if blood sugar levels drop too rapidly. Recently, her specially trained golden retriever, Scout, detected a dangerous blood sugar drop that went unnoticed by adults, alerting Maya to seek help before a medical emergency could develop. Medical alert dogs are a cutting-edge intersection of veterinary science and medical treatment, and Scout's actions demonstrate their life-saving potential. The segment featured an interview with Dr. Mitchell explaining the science of canine scent detection. It showed Maya demonstrating the secret command with Scout, explaining how their communication system worked. It included emotional statements from Mrs. about witnessing Scout's alert in action. And it ended with Scout receiving a medal of commendation from the school district superintendent. Sarah had recorded the segment, and she watched it 3 times that night, tears streaming down her face each time. Within 24 hours of the news segment airing, the story had been shared on social media thousands of times. Local news outlets across the state picked it up. A regional human interest story syndication company featured the Henderson family. By the following week, Scout and Maya's story had appeared in newspapers in California, Texas, Florida, and New York. The narrative was consistent and powerful. Skeptics silenced, hope validated, a girl and her dog against the odds. The comments on social media were a complete reversal from just weeks earlier. This is incredible. What an amazing dog. This family made the right choice. More people need to know about medical alert dogs. Scout is a hero. Messages poured in from families dealing with diabetes, from dog trainers interested in the field, from medical professionals fascinated by the science. The American Diabetes Association reached out to Sarah directly, asking if Maya and Scout would be willing to speak at their regional conference in November. The Colorado Center for Medical Alert Dogs called to say that Scout's story had generated more inquiries than they'd ever received. They now had a waiting list of over 500 families instead of 200. At the grocery store, where Sarah had once felt judged for bringing Scout, the cashier recognized her and called over the manager. "This is the family with the hero dog," she announced loudly. Other customers turned, smiling, offering congratulations. Sarah's mother called, her voice choked with emotion. "I saw you on the news. I'm so sorry I doubted you. You were right. You were absolutely right, and I should have believed in you." Perhaps most meaningfully, the local news anchor who had previously presented the story skeptically reached out with a personal apology. "I did your family a disservice," he said. "I approached the story with bias instead of curiosity. I should have done the research then that David did last week. I'm genuinely sorry." At school, Maya's experience transformed from being a source of embarrassment to being a point of pride. Children who had previously questioned her now approached her with admiration. Teachers mentioned her story in lessons about perseverance and believing in possibilities. The school invited Scout to a special assembly where he received recognition, and the entire student body stood and applauded as Maya walked Scout across the stage. David took Sarah out to dinner one evening in late October to celebrate. "We did it," he said simply, reaching across the table to hold her hand. "We believed in something when nobody else did, and we were right." "We didn't do it alone," Sarah replied, looking at Scout, who was lying contentedly under their table at the restaurant. "Scout did it. Scout proved what was possible." That night, lying in bed, Sarah reflected on how much had changed in just 72 hours. The same community that had mocked their investment in Scout was now celebrating it. The same people who had questioned their judgment were now seeking their advice. The skepticism that had weighed so heavily on their hearts had evaporated, replaced by respect and admiration. But more importantly, Maya had changed. The anxious, withdrawn child who had begun to doubt herself had transformed into a confident, hopeful girl who understood that sometimes the greatest things come from believing in what others dismiss. She had learned that being different wasn't bad, it was powerful. She had learned that her dog wasn't just a pet or even just a medical device. He was a partner, a protector, and proof that miracles were real. Scout, meanwhile, had become something of a local celebrity. But he remained unchanged, calm, focused, and completely devoted to the one job that mattered most, keeping Maya safe. The community's doubt had been replaced by something far more beautiful: wonder. The American Diabetes Association's regional conference in Denver was held at a sprawling convention center on the first weekend of November. Sarah stood backstage with Maya and Scout, helping her daughter adjust the microphone clipped to her navy blazer. Maya looked both terrified and determined, her fingers nervously stroking Scout's soft fur as if drawing courage from him. They had rehearsed the presentation dozens of times over the past 2 weeks, but the reality of speaking in front of 200 medical professionals, diabetes educators, and newly diagnosed families was hitting Maya hard. "You're going to be amazing," Sarah whispered, kissing the top of Maya's head. "Just talk about Scout like you always do. Talk about how he makes you feel. Tell them your truth." Maya nodded, taking a deep breath. Behind the curtain, Sarah could hear the conference organizer introducing Maya to the audience. "We have a very special presentation today," the organizer was saying. 8-year-old Maya Henderson will tell us about her partnership with Scout, a specially trained medical alert dog who recently saved her life. Maya, please come out and meet our audience." The curtain parted and Maya walked out with Scout at her side. Sarah watched from the wings, her heart in her throat. Her daughter looked so small on that large stage, but as she reached the podium and looked out at the audience, something shifted in her posture. She straightened. She lifted her chin. She looked confident. "Hi," Maya began, her voice clear and steady through the speakers. "My name is Maya Henderson, and I have type 1 diabetes. For a long time, that made me really scared. I was scared of my blood sugar dropping when I wasn't paying attention. I was scared of having a seizure. I was scared that I couldn't do normal kid things like play tag or go on field trips." Maya paused, looking down at Scout, who sat calmly beside the podium. "Then Scout came into my life, and everything changed." For the next 20 minutes, Maya told her story. She talked about what it felt like to be diagnosed, about the fear and confusion. She described the day Scout arrived and how she didn't understand at first what he could do. She explained, in simple but accurate terms, how Scout could detect the biochemical changes that happened when her blood sugar dropped. And then she got to the moment at the Science Museum. "I was in a dark theater and I felt really confused," Maya said, her voice growing quieter as she relived the moment. "My blood sugar was dropping really fast and I didn't even know how bad it was, but Scout knew. He stood up and he alerted me. He made me understand that something was wrong." Maya demonstrated the secret command for the audience. She made the hand gesture and whispered the phrase she and Scout shared. As she did, Scout executed his trained response, sitting firmly, placing his paw on her leg, refusing to move. The audience gasped. Several people in the front row had tears streaming down their faces. "This command is just between me and Scout," Maya explained. "When he alerts, I do this and he knows I understand. He knows I'm getting help. And that makes me feel safe. It makes me feel like I'm not fighting this disease alone." For her final demonstration, Dr. Mitchell, who had traveled from Colorado, stood up from the audience with a glucose meter. "Maya, I'm going to ask you something that might seem strange," she said. "But I want to show this audience something remarkable. I want you to tell me, based on what Scout is doing and how you're feeling, what you think your blood sugar might be right now." This was something they had practiced. Maya took a moment, observing Scout carefully, paying attention to her own body sensations. "Scout isn't alerting right now," she said thoughtfully. "He's relaxed, and I feel fine. I think my blood sugar is probably normal, maybe around 120. Dr. Mitchell checked her meter, a small device that measured blood sugar. 123, she announced. The audience erupted in applause. "Scout has taught me to listen to my body," Maya said as the applause died down. "He's taught me that I'm stronger than my disease, and he's taught me that sometimes the most important things are the ones people don't believe in until they see them work." When Maya finished and took a bow, the entire audience stood. It wasn't polite applause, it was a standing ovation, genuine and emotional. People were crying openly. Parents of newly diagnosed children were hugging each other. Medical professionals were taking notes furiously. And in that moment, Sarah understood that her daughter had become something more than a girl with a medical alert dog. She had become a voice for possibility, a living example of what could be accomplished when faith and science intersected. After the presentation, families surrounded Maya. A mother of a 6-year-old recently diagnosed with type 1 diabetes approached Sarah with tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for sharing your daughter's story. My son has been so frightened." Hearing Maya talk about Scout, about having hope and not being alone, it changes everything. It gives me hope too. Over the following 3 days, Maya participated in multiple panels and discussions. She met with medical researchers who were interested in studying canine scent detection more rigorously. 2 universities, the University of Colorado and the University of Pennsylvania, expressed serious interest in conducting formal research on dogs' ability to detect diabetes-related biochemical changes. They asked if the Henderson family would be willing to participate in a multi-year study. Sarah and David agreed enthusiastically. A representative from the National Institutes of Health approached Sarah about potential grant funding for research into medical alert dogs. The conversation was technical and complex, but the bottom line was clear. Scout's story had inspired genuine scientific interest in formalizing and expanding the field of medical alert dog training. By the time the Henderson family left Denver, something fundamental had shifted in Maya's self-perception. She was no longer just a sick child managing a chronic illness. She was an advocate, an educator, a young woman with a powerful message about possibility and hope. The invitations continued to arrive. A children's hospital in California asked if Maya would speak to newly diagnosed children about managing diabetes with confidence. A major diabetes nonprofit wanted to feature her story in their national awareness campaign. A publisher reached out about the possibility of a children's book about Maya and Scout's journey. In December, Maya was invited to speak at 5 different schools about diabetes awareness and service animals. At each presentation, she brought Scout, who had become comfortable with public appearances. Children were fascinated not just by the medical aspects but by the partnership between girl and dog. The way Scout watched Maya constantly, the way Maya trusted him completely, the obvious love between them. "Why does Scout love you so much?" a curious second grader asked during one school presentation. "Because his job is to protect me," Maya explained simply. "But also, I think, because I love him. We're a team. We take care of each other." That statement seemed to resonate with children across every age group. The idea of partnership, of mutual care and protection, was something every kid understood. And through that understanding, they began to grasp what diabetes meant, what medical alert dogs could do, and why Maya's story mattered. By January, Scout had become something of a celebrity in his own right. Local pet stores donated supplies for his care. A dog food company reached out about sponsorship. The Colorado Center for Medical Alert Dogs reported that their waiting list had grown to over 1,000 families, an unprecedented number that had forced them to hire additional staff and expand their facility. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from Maya's classmates and teachers. At her school's winter celebration, the PTA presented Maya with an award recognizing her courage, perseverance, and service to the community. Maya accepted it with grace, and as she held the plaque, she looked over at Scout and smiled, the kind of smile that contained gratitude, pride, and the deep knowledge that she had found her purpose. That evening, Maya wrote in her journal, something she'd started doing after the conference. "I used to think having diabetes was the worst thing that could happen to me. I was so scared and sad. But now I understand that Scout and I are supposed to help other people. We're supposed to show them that scary things can become beautiful things if you believe in them. I don't want my diabetes to go away anymore. I want to use it. I want to help people understand that being different isn't bad. Being different is powerful." Sarah read those words and understood that her daughter had truly transformed. Maya had taken her greatest challenge and transmuted it into her greatest strength. And Scout, the dog that skeptics had dismissed, had been the catalyst for that transformation. Retry exactly 1 year after Scout arrived at the Henderson household, Sarah stood in the backyard watching her daughter play tag with a group of neighborhood children. Maya ran freely, laughing without restraint, her movements quick and joyful. Scout bounded alongside her, keeping pace effortlessly, his amber fur gleaming in the afternoon sunlight. To any observer, it looked like a normal summer day, a normal girl playing with her dog and friends. But to Sarah, it represented something miraculous, the reclamation of a childhood that type 1 diabetes had nearly stolen. Maya had changed so profoundly over the past 12 months that sometimes Sarah had to remind herself this was the same anxious, frightened child who had been diagnosed just 2 years earlier. The fear that had once defined her had been replaced by confidence. The limitations she'd placed on herself had dissolved. She had become brave not because her illness had gone away, but because she'd learned to live fully alongside it. Scout's alert at the Science Museum had been only the beginning. In the year that followed, Scout had alerted Maya to dangerous blood sugar drops 17 additional times, each alert potentially preventing a serious medical emergency. But beyond the medical interventions, something equally important had happened. Scout had given Maya a sense of agency and control. She was no longer passively waiting for something bad to happen. She had a partner who was actively protecting her, and that knowledge transformed how she moved through the world. In February, Maya had been invited to the White House. The invitation came through a foundation focused on pediatric diabetes research, which had selected Maya as one of 10 young people to meet the First Lady as part of Diabetes Awareness Month. Maya had been photographed with the First Lady, Scout at her side in his specially pressed harness. The photo had appeared in newspapers across the country with captions like, "Young advocate and her medical alert dog meet the First Lady," and "Inspiring partnership changes lives." The scientific research into medical alert dogs had accelerated dramatically. The University of Colorado and University of Pennsylvania launched their formal studies, with Scout serving as one of the primary subjects. Researchers were documenting his alert behaviors, collecting data on his accuracy rates, and conducting biochemical analysis on how dogs' olfactory systems could detect blood sugar changes. Preliminary findings suggested that properly trained dogs could detect hypoglycemic episodes with an accuracy rate exceeding 95%, a remarkable figure that validated everything Scout could do. This research had real-world implications. Insurance companies had begun covering medical alert dog training as a legitimate medical expense for select pediatric diabetes patients. The Colorado Center for Medical Alert Dogs, initially a small specialized facility, had expanded significantly and was now training dogs at a rate 3 times faster than the previous year. Other organizations had begun opening across the country, inspired by Scout's story and supported by the growing body of scientific evidence. In May, Maya had given a talk at a local venue, speaking to an audience of entrepreneurs, scientists, educators, and community members. Her presentation, titled "What the World Misses When It Stops Believing," had been recorded and uploaded to YouTube, where it had accumulated over 2 million views. In the talk, Maya discussed not just Scout's capabilities, but the deeper lesson her journey had taught her. When people didn't believe in Scout, Maya had told the audience, they weren't just doubting a dog, they were doubting a possibility. They were saying that something I needed, something that could save my life, couldn't exist. But it did exist. It exists right now, and it will keep existing as long as we're willing to believe in things we haven't seen yet. The quote had been shared repeatedly on social media, inspiring people far beyond the diabetes community. Teachers used it in classrooms. Therapists shared it with clients. Parents referenced it when encouraging their children to believe in themselves. Maya's words had resonated because they came from genuine experience, not inspiration poster platitudes. But perhaps the most significant impact had occurred at a local level. 3 other families in the school district had pursued medical alert dogs for their children with type 1 diabetes. A local veterinary clinic had begun offering specialized training programs for interested dog owners. The school district had created an official policy recognizing and accommodating medical alert dogs on campus. And most importantly, the culture of skepticism and judgment that had once surrounded the Henderson family had been completely replaced by a culture of support and encouragement. At school, Maya was no longer defined by her illness or her dog. She was simply Maya, the smart, funny, kind girl who happened to have diabetes and happened to have an amazing dog. She had friends who genuinely cared about her, teachers who understood her needs without making her feel different, and a community that celebrated her accomplishments. In her free time, Maya had begun volunteering with the local diabetes support group, helping newly diagnosed children and their families navigate the initial shock and fear of diagnosis. She told them her story, introduced them to Scout, and showed them that life after diagnosis could be full and meaningful. She had started a blog documenting her experiences with diabetes, Scout, and living a full life despite chronic illness. The blog had attracted thousands of followers from around the world, many of whom reached out to share how Maya's honesty and positivity had helped them. Scout, meanwhile, had become something of a local legend. A statue of a golden retriever had been commissioned for the town square, with a plaque that read, "In honor of Scout, a hero who showed us that love and loyalty can save lives." The statue had become a gathering place where children would visit to leave drawings and notes expressing their gratitude for Scout's service. On a practical level, Scout had become fully integrated into the Henderson family life. He had a favorite sleeping spot on the living room rug. He knew everyone's schedules and routines. He could open doors with his nose and had learned to alert Sarah and David to Maya's lows even when she wasn't in the same room. He remained constantly focused on his primary responsibility, keeping Maya safe, but he also got to be a dog. He played fetch. He rolled in the grass. He stole socks from the laundry basket, and he received endless affection from a family that loved him completely. David had built Scout a special area in the backyard, a comfortable shelter where he could rest during hot days, with automatic water fountains and cooling mats. Maya had decorated it with colorful tiles she'd painted herself, each one bearing a message of love and gratitude for Scout's care. One evening in July, as Sarah and David sat on the porch watching Maya and Scout play in the yard, David reached over and squeezed his wife's hand. "Do you remember how scared we were?" he asked quietly. "Every single day," Sarah replied. "I remember feeling like our lives were falling apart." "And now," David prompted. Sarah watched her daughter throw a ball and watched Scout race after it, his joy uncontained. "Now I think we were broken open," she said thoughtfully, "so something beautiful could grow back together." They sat in comfortable silence for a long moment. Then Sarah continued, "I used to think that the hardest part would be managing Maya's illness, but the hardest part was believing that a good life was still possible. Once we started believing in possibilities again, in Scout, in Maya's strength in the future, everything changed." In September, as Maya prepared to start 4th grade, she was invited to speak at the school's opening assembly. She stood on the stage in front of the entire student body, with Scout at her side. Mrs., now the school's diabetes coordinator, introduced her as one of the bravest students at Riverside Elementary and a true inspiration to everyone who knows her. Maya talked about starting 4th grade with confidence. She talked about her partnership with Scout, and she shared a message that had become the theme of her life. A year ago, people didn't believe in Scout. They didn't believe a dog could do what he does. But Scout didn't care what people believed. He just kept doing his job, protecting me, loving me, and showing me that I was stronger than I thought. Now, when people tell me something is impossible, I remember Scout. And I remember that sometimes the most important things are the ones people don't understand yet. The applause that followed was thunderous. Children stood and cheered. Teachers had tears in their eyes. And in that moment, Sarah understood something profound. Her daughter had learned not just to survive her illness, but to use it as a catalyst for growth, compassion, and inspiration. As the school year began, Maya settled into a new rhythm. She was a student, an advocate, a speaker, a writer, a friend. But most importantly, she was a girl who had learned that the greatest adventures often begin when you're brave enough to believe in something nobody else does yet. Scout remained her constant companion, her protector, her partner in everything. The dog who had been dismissed as a waste of money had become priceless, not because of his monetary value, but because of the life he had helped his girl reclaim. And sometimes, when Sarah caught them together, Maya sitting cross-legged on the floor with Scout's head in her lap, the two of them completely connected in a bond that transcended words, she would smile and whisper a quiet thank you to the universe, to fate, to whatever force had brought them together. Because they had learned the greatest lesson of all, that love, combined with belief and determination, truly could change everything. The girl who had been frightened and alone now moved through the world with joy and purpose, with a dog at her side who loved her completely and believed in her absolutely. And together, they showed everyone who knew them that miracles were real, not because they the laws of nature, but because they represented what became possible when you refused to stop believing in them. The end.